Everyone, welcome back to Shutter Magazine. I'm Dustin Lucas, and today we're going to talk about techniques with dodging and burning. The biggest thing when dodging and burning your images is whether you're destroying the image or you're working non-destructively. Um, Working with Photoshop layers sort of solves that problem, but looking at different tool sets and things can sort of set you up the correct way and sort of the incorrect way or the more sort of destructive way in editing. And so we're going to look at those different techniques, starting out with the dodge and burn tools specifically. So what you can do is I have my image here. I'm going to go ahead and turn it off. This is originally how it's sort of shot. So I exposed it a little bit darker for the environment. And you can see that the subjects are quite a bit darker in the environment. So we want to bring a little more emphasis, draw our eyes to the subjects. What we need to do is dodge them out, which is going to mean brightening them. Some of the other terms I'm going to be using is burning, which is something I would want to do in these sort of highlighted areas, and these sort of softer areas, and darkening that. So we're not staring at those pillars, we're getting right to the subject. We have the leading lines, which are doing quite a lot in this composition, but we want the dodging and burning to sort of hone in on our subjects. So I'm looking at the background layer. By clicking on that, I'm ready to activate my dodge and burn tools. So we can strike the O key, and that immediately takes us to specifically the dodge tool. So the first thing we need to do in this image is dodge our subjects out. Well, before we get jumping into this tool, we need to kind of know how this tool affects the images and how it can sort of dodge or lighten our subjects. What we need to look at is range. You're going to have three options for range. You can dodge the highlights, the midtones, and the shadows. Gives you some pretty good flexibility in dodging your image. You're also going to notice this option for exposure. Now, exposure is going to kind of work the same way opacity does for adjustment layers or any other sort of adjustments in Photoshop. It's going to be the amount, and I sort of stick between 0 and 15. For this tutorial, kind of stick around 8 and just kind of show you how it works. So let's put this tool in action and um, see how useful it is. So we're going to zoom into our subjects here. I've clicked on my background layer. Now remember, I haven't duplicated this. I'm working on my original raw background, which means I'm destroying it. I'm changing its appearance. I'm changing its the original image. So I can click here. As you can see, as I start to click in these tones, it's going to start to lift just the midtones. Is that you can hear my mouse clicking quite a bit. Know that I'm working on a mouse and not on a Wacom tablet. Benefit of a Wacom tablet is you can hold down on your subjects uh, quite a bit longer and allow this effect to sort of hold over. So I'm going to kind of use this at my to my advantage and using the mouse and just sort of showing you that you can do this kind of work with even the simplest of tools. Uh, but you can see here I'm kind of going into the midtone areas and I'm just clicking on my image. Now, you have to realize that I'm not on an empty layer. I'm not on a duplicated of my background layer. I am destroying my original image. And eventually I'm going to run out of history states to where I can go back in time. So what I can do is I can cycle between the different areas in my image if I want to get some of these shadows out, dodge some of these shadows. The nice kind of thing about this is that it's not gonna affect my highlights or my midtones. It's just gonna affect the shadow. So I can do some pretty nice dodging techniques with this tool. It kind of works very similarly to the darkroom, thinking about dodging and burning on your original image. Well, being that we're working in Photoshop kind of defeats the purpose of it being able to work in layers and work non-destructively. So what we can do is we can start to take this tool on separate layers to sort of create a little more flexibility and also get us back to where we're not editing back on our original image. That's considered destructive editing. It is a no-no for Photoshop. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and just create new layers. That's going to be Shift Command N. And we're going to name the first one Dodge. And what we're going to do is we're going to change this to overlay. And we're going to choose fill in overlay with neutral color 50% gray. So it's just going to give us a gray blank layer. We're going to do that same thing for burn layer. Do mode, overlay, and we'll click 50% gray. Now, what we're going to do for the dodge layer is we have our dodge tool already, and that's great. So as you see, we've already went back, sort of back in our history states. We're at 8%. So now what we can do is we can start doing the dodging directly on this image here. I might have to turn. Let's see here. So you can see it's doing a little bit of work. Nothing too crazy. I'm kind of clicking away here, lifting my midtones. Excuse me, my shadows. Let's go back to midtones. Maybe we're getting a little more action out of the midtones. Yeah, quite a bit more. So we're lifting that up. We can even, by hitting enter, we can change our exposure values and hitting enter again to 15. Maybe bring that up a little bit. Maybe we're being a little too conservative with that. So we can go ahead and lift all that up, kind of go into my midtones. We'll go back into shadows and we'll lift some of those up. So you can see we're starting to lift those up, and um, we can change between those ranges. You have a little more flexibility, but it takes a little more time. This just seems a little clunky for me. I can hold Shift and hit O, and it's going to take me over to the burn. So now I want to start burning down this dress. What I want to do is get into the highlights. So I'm going to start burning this dress down just in those highlights. Shrink my brush down. And remind you, I am working on a pretty soft brush, so it's going to blend pretty good to the edges. But as you can start to see, it's not really doing a whole lot of work for me. Let's turn my brush up here to 15. Maybe we can get a little more work um, out of this burn layer here. Kind of turn the dress a little blue. We'll zoom out, see if we can get some more action on these pillars. Starting to burn down some of these highlighted areas. Zoom out a little bit more. As you can see, we're getting there, slowly but surely, but still a little cumbersome for me. Zoom out a little bit more. Start to burn down in here. As we can see, these two layers are doing a pretty good job. It's taking a little bit too much time. What I want to do is, I want to be a little bit faster and get the same results. So let's start looking at messing with blending modes and get away from the dodge and burn tool and start using the brush. We use the brush for layer masks. We use the brush just for a lot of things. And that's kind of the way I like to work. Some of these specialized tools work well, say for cloning or healing, but for dodging and burning, I don't really need to use those specialized tools. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to throw those layers away. And I'm going to duplicate my background layer. So I'm going to do Option Command J, and I'm going to call this Dodge. And I'm going to change my Dodge layer, let's see here, to Screen. That's going to lighten this layer. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then I'm also going to go in here and I'm going to hold Option and click on Layer Mask so it turns that off. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to do Option Command J, we're going to do Burn, and we're going to change this to Multiply. Multiply is going to take this and just add an immense amount of contrast and just darkness to this image overall. So we're going to look for Multiply here, and we're going to click OK. We're also going to hold Option, click on our Layer Mask button. Now we're ready. We can start painting. So we can keep our paintbrush by hitting the B key. We have our paintbrush on 15%. That's fine. We can have our softness on our brush. Now this is very important. If we have our hardness up, this is something to remember whenever you're blending these different layers in with the background. Is when you're painting some of this in, you don't want a hard edge. I mean, we're getting some really nasty haloing there. It's quite nasty. You can also tell it's affecting all of our tone, all of our range of tones. A little bit limited in the sense versus the dodge and burn. You have shadows, midtones, and highlights. So what we want to make sure we're doing is we're going to back up here in a bunch of history states. Is we're going to make sure that our brush is certainly soft. We're going to go in and we're just going to paint. Well, we actually have to paint on our layer mask, not on the actual layer. And make sure we're on the right layer. Dodge. And so we're just clicking and just brightening up just those shadows. But you also have to remember it's going to brighten the highlights as well. So you have to be a little more careful with this work. But it's a little bit faster. It's a little bit faster of a technique than the dodge and burn. But you have a little more flexibility in the sense that you don't have to toggle between two buttons. Where I'm hitting X to toggle between my foreground and background layer. That's my essential. That's my removing the effect from the background layer. So if I want to remove some of this effect, of course, I'll paint black back over it to darken his face back up. But mostly I'm working in the with the white. The white is the foreground color because now I can go in and I can do my dodging and burning. So now I can burn this dress down quite a bit. But remember, it's going to get the shadows as well as the highlights. It's something just to remember. You just want to burn these flowers down here. We can zoom out and see how quick we can get these pillars going. If I wanted to put it up to 25 opacity, remember you can hit enter, type in the amount you want to increase, and just edit away. So we can do a little more work on this background, kind of darken everything down, pay attention to those details, just to do a little bit quicker of an edit, and then we can go in here, dodge our subjects out. Now I'm going to take this down to 10%, I think. Just really dodge maybe some of these shadows. Just brighten the faces up a little bit. We don't want to get too crazy. Want them to have a little bit of contour, a little contrast, so they have some depth to look flat. But it's also nice to see some details. So just real quick, kind of taking the image overall from there to there. You see it's already starting to bring a little life to this image. Now, another technique is using curves. A great thing about curves is that you have a lot more flexibility. Say, for instance, if I want to burn down parts of this image, but also want to sort of reduce these highlights, or if I want to dodge an area and flatten some of those black tones, I can do that with curves because I have that flexibility. So what we're going to do is create a couple curves, layer adjustments, not exposure, clicked on. I'm going to go to a couple curves adjustments. We'll just create two real quick here. We'll name this first one burn. And what I'm going to do, since I'm burning down, I'm also going to go in and I'm just going to flatten some of these highlight tones. You're going to notice here what it's doing immediately is it's just flattening some of those tones down. So depending on how sort of bright white those tones are, it's not really bringing detail in, but it's just flattening those whites in this image to where you have a little more detail, or it just adds a little bit of gray, which sort of fakes detail, if you will. So what we can do is, since we're going to be doing a burn layer, we can also drop this down a little bit to give a little more burn. So that does some nice effects for our pillars, for a lot of our parts of our image, but the whole image doesn't need that either. So we need to make sure that we are. Don't want to do that. Go away my vector mask. I don't need that. So we'll go ahead and invert this. Command I should have held Option while clicking curves, but that's okay. Do the same thing here, but we want to make sure that we're seeing the effect before we turn the mask off. So this is going to be our dodge layer. You can call these lighten, darken, whatever is easiest for you to remember. This is from the sort of film days. So we can flatten the blacks, and we can also just lift things up just a little bit. We don't want to get too crazy with those black tones and lifting them, but it helps it. It helps us so we don't have to do as much work with the shadows. You can see it lifts a lot of that out. So we're not going to do that much of an effect to it, but it's just going to let us do a little bit of work to where we can flatten some of those tones. So we can go in here. Around 10%, yeah. So you can go in here and kind of work through this. As you can see, it's a subtle effect. And if we want to take this and double it, we can always duplicate this layer, and it'll actually double the effects that we just did. That's a nice little trick whenever you're working with adjustment layers or any layers. You can double the effect by just duplicating the layer. So we also have, we're going to notice in this burn, we can burn this area down. It's just going to flatten some of those highlights down. Just kind of gets rid of those distractions, some of those details. We can bring some of those details back in there. It just works really nice whenever you have blown out dresses. Just bringing some of that detail back in. Also, we want to take, say we want to take these pillars down. It's going to flatten some of those tones as well. You would be kind of careful with this. You don't want to ruin the tonality of your image, especially on those highlights, or get any of this on the skin. You don't want to flatten white tones on skin. It looks kind of goofy. But this kind of gives you just a real quick, I'm not really taking my time, but that's not, not really the point. You just want to kind of show these different techniques, but also how fast you can work through an image when working through them as well. That's just as important. But you want to make sure you're getting enough. You're spending the time you're spending in Photoshop. At least you're paying attention to the details and dropping those down. So this is another technique you can do with the curves. Works pretty great. Just subtle adjustment, but all those details, all those differences. I'd probably spend a little more time dodging. My dodging doesn't look super great, but it's for 45 seconds, it's good enough. So we're gonna go ahead and throw those away. Now we have a one other technique you can do with the high pass filter, which just kind of gives you just a real quick effect that kind of gives you a little more intensity, but it's going to make the highlights a little bit more apparent and make the shadows a little bit darker, which sounds funny for dodge and burn, but it's kind of an interesting effect. So what we need to do is duplicate our background layer. So we're going to do Option Command J. We're going to go ahead. We'll just call this high pass, dodge and burn. And what we're going to do, did I lose my mouse? Okay, got it back. We're going to go ahead and we're going to desaturate this layer. So we're going to do Shift Command U. Go ahead and desaturate it. And what we're ready to do now is change the blending mode. Now we can do soft light, which is a little more of a subtle effect. We can do vivid light, which is comic book crazy. I mean, that's way over the top. So we're going to go ahead and do soft light for now. And we're going to turn our high pass on. Go down here to other, high pass. We're going to keep this between 70 and 100. Now, reason being is that in this sort of range, we want there to be a little bit of bite to it. As you can see, when we take it too far, it's just not enough. We're getting rid of, this is more like for sharpening, where you're starting to see just the edges. But we want to take it right to that point where it shifts them. See that difference between there and there? It starts to shift them so they have a little bit of black tones in their hair. I'm going to do this right around 100. I think it's going to be good. Go ahead and click OK. And you notice it just gives us a little bit of a punch on our highlights. What we can do is we can click, we can hold Option and click Layer Mask, and we can paint some of this in. And this effect isn't, for everyone, but it's just a real quick way for you to go in and just highlight some of those tones versus maybe not so much for dodging out, but it's definitely going to bring some highlights to your image. Quite a bit of clarity. It kind of does a little bit of a clarity effect, similar to how Lightroom has clarity, a little bit sharpening, a little bit of a mid-tone contrast boost. But yeah, it's a it's a subtle effect. It definitely has a little bit of a sharpening look to it. But we can also duplicate this layer if we want to make that double the effect. I mean, you can duplicate a bunch of them if you wanted to really take them up, and then we can take this down to 50% to have 150% the effect. So there are those options. But when it comes to dodging and burning, the simplest way to dodge and burn an image is to just do just a real simple new layer, overlay, 50% gray. I'm just going to call it dodge and burn, D&B. And what we're going to use is a 10% brush. That's it, paintbrush. And painting white's going to give you a dodge. Painting black's going to give you a burn. So we're going in here. That's how simple it is. Now we can do 5% where it's a little more subtle. That's really all you need. And then all I'm doing is hitting the X key, and then I can immediately burn. Now, with some of the blown out highlights, you're not going to have as much of a recovery, but for a well exposed image, for just a quick dodge and burn, that's the best way to go. I mean, it's always good to have actions. All of my dodge and burn techniques are all built into actions, very simple. But when it comes to workflow or doing things from scratch, you can't beat this technique of just doing the overlay using a 5 or 10% brush. You are literally just painting. Gotta make sure his hands aren't, like cold and dead. Kind of do some work there. Make sure it's not too dark. Make sure we can see his shoe. Bring up some of those shadows. I mean, working real quick. Don't want to remove all that contrast, but we want to get rid of some of these some of these distractions. It'd be nice to have just this, his coat to look a little more uniform in tone. So now we can go back. Um, what you can really do is, do some work with, if you want to darken everything or just go through and burn these all down. So we can do maybe get a little crazier with my brush here. Just burn this down. But that's as simple as it is. I mean, just kind of going through this and a little time that I'm spending on this, you can kind of zoom in and get a little more out of this. But this lets you kind of zoom in, and we have some distractions here. Can't get all that out. Might make sense to burn this down just to give a little bit more. And now we can. I don't know if we want to do it that much, but kind of gives us the ability to work a little bit more with the dodge and burn. But yeah, that's the simplest way to do it. And whether you're using different blending modes, working with curves, working with duplicating your background layers, making new layers at 50% gray, however you're working, you definitely want to work on layers. That's Can't stress that enough. You don't want to destroy your image. You want to dodge and burn it. But that's all I have for you guys for this tutorial. Definitely reach out to me if you have any questions or any other techniques that you use that you didn't see in this tutorial. And tune in next month. Thanks.